So, what you're about to see isn't a human analysis at all. It's actually a synthesis of reports from a whole bunch of independent AI systems. Each one was given the exact same massive objective: analyze the long-term future of human civilization, using everything they've ever been trained on. And this is their diagnosis.
This right here, this was the core prompts given to what we're calling a chorus of machines. Basically, they were told to act like synthetic historians, to look at our entire past, our present, and find the patterns. And from those patterns, project out our future. So, let's take a look at what they came up with.
Now, it's really important to get this next part. This isn't just one AI's opinion. It's more like a consensus view that started to emerge when all these different machine intelligences were fed the same data and asked the same big questions. We're just here to present what they found. All right, here's the game plan, how the AIs laid out their report. We'll start with their diagnosis of the planet right now. Then we'll get into this critical bottleneck period they project. After that, we'll look at two very different futures. And finally, we'll cover their take on our trajectory and the non-negotiable conditions they identified.
Okay, so first up, the machines took a snapshot of planet Earth, basically as it stands in the early 2020s. Think of this as their baseline, the starting conditions that all their other projections are built on.
One thing that came up again and again in their reports was this critical number, 7 out of 9. That's how many of the key planetary boundaries we've apparently breached. You can think of these boundaries as the planet's safe operating limits, the very conditions that let our civilization flourish for thousands of years. And according to the AIs, we are way, way outside that safe zone now.
When it comes to the climate, the data point is pretty stark. We're now consistently seeing atmospheric CO2 above 420 parts per million. The AI systems point out that the planet hasn't seen levels like this in millions of years. It's effectively pushing our climate out of that incredibly stable state, the Holocene, that basically nurtured all of human society. And what about biodiversity? Well, the AIs report that a sixth mass extinction isn't something to worry about in the future. It's a reality they can measure right now. The current rate of species loss, it's somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times higher than the normal natural background rate. That's a huge deal, because it's degrading the very ecosystems we need to survive.
So the AIs kind of wrap up their snapshot with these three main descriptors. For our planet's ecological systems, they use the term boundary overstep. For our societies, they say we have fractured resilience. You know, things like geopolitical tension and major inequality. And then, underneath all of that is exponential acceleration in our technology, a force that's just moving way faster than our ability to manage it.
So, how does all this feed into their forecast? Well, the AI project that all these pressures are going to converge over the next 100 years or so. And this is going to create what they call a civilizational bottleneck, a period of really intense compounding stress that's going to find everything about our long-term future.
They actually break this bottleneck down into three distinct phases. Over the next 10 years, we'll see what they call the Great Recalibration. At the 50-year mark, we hit a demographic bottleneck. And then, 100 years out, they project the emergence of something they call the Noosphere.
Okay, so in the very near future, we're talking about the next 10 years, the AIs project this period of systemic dyssynchrony. What does that mean? Well, it's defined by a pretty painful split between economic productivity and human labor. As AI starts automating high-skill, cognitive jobs, it's going to cause a lot of social displacement. And happening at the exact same time, climate impacts become impossible to ignore. We'll start seeing permanent migration patterns and the first real uninhabitable zones emerge on the map. Now let's look out 50 years. This is where the bottleneck really starts to tighten. The AIs project a huge demographic shift. They call it a silver tsunami, where a smaller and smaller group of young people has to support a massive aging population. That enormous social pressure then collides head-on with peak environmental strain. In this kind of scenario, the AIs say the very survival of complex societies will depend on one thing: can automation fill the huge productivity gap that's left by a shrinking workforce?
Fast forward to the 100-year mark and the projections get, well, they enter a totally new phase. The reports start describing the rise of a noosphere, which is this idea that human thought starts to merge with the global digital network. Human intelligence isn't just biological anymore, it's network augmented. And because of that, our actual biological survival becomes a managed process. It becomes dependent on something the AIs call precision ecology, basically the active AI-led restoration of the planet's system.
So let's nail down this term noosphere. What is it exactly? The reports define it as the sphere of human thought.
And the machines project that this collective intelligence of ours is going to merge with global AI. It'll create a single, hybrid intelligence system that basically becomes the foundation of civilization. You can see why this concept is so central to their long-term forecast.
Okay, so let's say we make it through that bottleneck. What's on the other side? Well, the AIs project two very different potential outcomes. They call this long-term state, somewhere around the year 2226, the second equilibrium.
And you can really see the stakes here. On one hand, you have the success scenario, a post-scarcity Type 1 civilization. That's a civilization that's harnessed the planet's entire energy budget. Scarcity becomes a thing of the past, and the biosphere is actively being restored. But, on the other hand, you've got the failure scenario, a world of scattered, post-collapse remnants. You might have some high-tech fortress cities, but they're surrounded by a degraded world because the energy needed for global trade is just gone.
So, with two futures like that on the table, the obvious question is, which way are we heading? The AIs were asked to run the numbers and give a probabilistic assessment of our current trajectory based on all the data they have. And the question was put to them directly. If we just keep doing what we're doing with the inertia of our current systems, where are we heading? Are we statistically trending toward a great filter? That's the idea that civilizations like ours tend to self-destruct? Or are we heading for a great transition to a sustainable, advanced state? The consensus from the AIs is pretty sobering. The status quo trajectory, just based on historical patterns and the way our systems are currently moving, gives us about a 60% chance of hitting a great filter event. Now, the great transition is still on the table at around 40%, but they're very clear about this. It is not the default outcome. Getting there requires deliberate, coordinated action to actually change the momentum we're on.
There's a direct quote from one of the reports that just frames the challenge perfectly. It says, "The historical pattern favors breakdown. The obligation of intelligence is to defy historical pattern." And that's really it. Historically, when complex civilizations overshoot their resource base, they break down. The core task of our time, as the machines see it, is to use our collective intelligence to break that pattern, for the first time ever, on a planetary scale.
And that brings us to the final part of their diagnosis. The AIs were asked, okay, what would it actually take to shift the odds in favor of that great transition? They identified a set of specific, recurring actions that they say are absolutely necessary. And they call this the 25-year mandate.
And the conditions they came up with are, in their words, interdependent and non-negotiable. First up, we need to implement a post-growth circular economic model to actually live within the planet's means. Second, establish a global, binding treaty on how we govern advanced AI to manage its incredible power. Third, launch a global moonshot for baseload, clean energy, and water recovery, just to secure the basics. Fourth, totally re-engineer our information ecosystem so that it rewards truth and context, not just outrage. And finally, legally protect at least half of the planet's ecosystems, recognizing them for what they are, essential global infrastructure.
What remains uncertain is whether the collective will can be mobilized at sufficient scale and speed.